your music is not making you over 40K a year, please go and get a job.
This is a first installment of a DIY artist podcast. My name is Nico Santana. I'm an artist, creative, and Latino entrepreneur. Today's first guest on the podcast, if this will be one, is my boy Prodigyl. Just to give you a brief introduction on who he is, I met this guy on a tour, Hip Hop and Tacos tour in Houston. We've actually spoken before that, but that was my official time, the first time meeting him. Young artist, man, fresh out the gate. It came with really well-developed content. Production value was high. He really knew what to do, how to do it, and do it the right way. And more importantly, he has a strong why. He has an affinity towards the Christian hip hop genre, which is a genre, if you're not familiar with it, that has been blossoming over the past decade, if not more. So he definitely knows how to navigate both a niche audience, himself, being a part of that community, great marketer, I would say, and a great artist. So I'd like to officially welcome you to the podcast, Prodigyl.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, man. I hope this turns into a series. I really do. I want to see more episodes, man. I think this is definitely something that you'll be excelling at for sure. Just from the starting introduction, I love how you introduced me, so I know you're going to do well. Yeah, man, like as you said, like my name is Prodigyl. I'm straight from Houston, Texas, Mo City. Man, I started honestly doing Christian hip hop since I released my first project in 2019. Been kind of like putting in the work maybe like a year or two before that, kind of, figuring my way out around a microphone and like recording myself, and also like trying to figure out what my name should be and all these different things. So, but once I kind of settled on everything, I released my first project in 2019. It was called Identity. And then been doing it ever since. And, hopefully, I think, speaking for myself, like I feel like I have progressed, but, still got a long ways to go. Again, like you said, I'm just right out of the gate right now, just like a new artist, right? Relatively super new, and just trying to absorb information as much as I can, and really just putting myself out there and connecting with people. That's the main thing, connecting with the CHH genre in general, and also the Catholic side of things as well. I've been lucky to meet a lot of Catholic artists such as yourself and Foundation, and also the new guys like Cody Free and Cold Kadesh, and all these dudes that are just really coming out. So yeah, it's been awesome just being in the space. So again, thank you so much for having me, bro.
Man, no, the honor is mine, all mine, really. And you're super humble when it comes to just talking about your craft and, the way that you've approached things. I think to me, it's important to be a forever student, right? And that takes a level of humility that oftentimes gets lost, especially in the genre of hip hop. And any genre, period. I've seen, I've been around enough musicians to know when people get, kind of a balloon head, if you will, and others who are, forever learners and students. So I definitely appreciate that from you. But, we've had discussions offline before, multiple discussions, not just you, but Colt Kadesh, who you mentioned earlier. And, coming from at least my perspective of somebody who's been doing this and pursuing this for well over 10 years and really still feeling like an amateur, still feeling like a novice, I've learned a lot from you. So let's talk about some of the things that you and I have talked about offline and kind of bring light some of these subjects that a lot of artists maybe don't really think about as much, but perhaps should. One of those things is, you've been releasing music here for the last, I don't know, what would you say, like about a year or so?
Yeah, a little bit more than a year.
A little bit more than a year. Okay. Talk about.
2 years. Yeah,
there you go. Okay. So 2 years. And talk about your strategy from how you've packaged your music, released it, singles, EPs, albums. What have you done and what have you seen that has worked better for you?
Yeah. So I think, I guess I'm kind of like I used to be, right? I was an old head in the sense of, and I know that some people might have a problem with using that term when I'm explaining it, but basically I really thought that my first like gateway or entry into a genre like CHH or even hip hop in general would be a dope album. Like I was thinking like in a mixtape mindset,
Mm.
right? When like people would drop mixtapes before an album and all these different things, and I'm just like I'm not really looking to drop mixtapes, but I can just drop an album so that I'll seem more professional,
Right.
right? That I'm in it for the long run kind of thing. Not really analyzing what's going on within music in general, which is people are dropping singles and maximum EPs, like 4 to 5 songs packaged together, right? Or singles, or maybe even 2 song singles, right? Like the 2 pack kind of thing that people sometimes do. And so but I, not knowing any of this, just like I guess I dropped 2 singles to lead into an album, right? Which is like relatively, it was short. It was 9 songs, not counting the intro and an interlude. Like it's 7 full songs, but it was marketed as an album, and I think that was definitely something that as I progressed through my career, I realized that that might not have been the best way to go about it because I don't have an audience,
Mm.
right? I don't have an audience to sit down and consume a full album in its entirety, right? They're not invested in me. They don't know me. They don't know my name. They might be like, Prodigyl, who is this dude? All right, from Houston, Texas. All right, cool. I rock with Houston, but what's this guy got to offer? Right now, a few people might have chosen down and listened to the full album. But honestly, if I even asked a few of my friends, right, because that was really my kind of my warm audience, which is the people who are close to me, right, who would support me no matter what. I don't think they've listened to the full album, right? I think they listened to only a few songs off of it, and that's it. Maybe the singles. I know that my first single was called Lion's Den,
Mm.
and the second one's Gasoline. I know people who still listen to Lion's Den because it was a single,
Yeah.
right? And it was like a hype song, and like everything, everyone really like connected with that and all that stuff. But to this day, I don't know if anyone sat down and listened to that full album from front to back, like from top to bottom. I don't think anyone's really sat down and listened to it. So I realized that as I kept going, like as I started, connecting with people in the industry, I realized that, well, Spotify, like if you look at like digital streaming platforms, if you look at that, like they are really streamlined for singles and for singles to be placed into playlists,
Yeah.
right? And so people pick out this one song that they're rocking with, and then they'll put it into maybe a playlist with uh, people who follow that because they like that sort of music, and then hopefully they'll turn to your music for future releases, and then you can build it up that way. But right now, like what I'm seeing is like the go-to method for releasing music as an independent artist, because again, you gotta think, right? We're
Mm.
putting money into this thing,
Right.
okay? Unless you're doing everything on your own, which is I have the most utmost respect for you. But if you're doing everything like production, mixing, cover art, promo, like everything, if you're doing that on your own, like I will applaud you like forever, But for a lot of people, for me, like I don't have particularly the time to sit down and listen to learn how to produce, right,
Right.
or mix or master, right, or do cover art. I'm horrible at art. First of all, like I can't imagine anything in my head and put it in like art form. That's horrible. Like I don't have that kind of vision. But what I am good at is writing songs and rapping. And so that's what I'm gonna be focusing on. And so I outsource it to people. So imagine like you're releasing like an album full of songs, and you're possibly spending around maybe 1,000. Okay, let's bring it down. Maybe like 500 per song. Okay,
Yeah.
that's probably in terms of like mixing, mastering, cover art, and all that stuff. Multiply it by like 10, right? How much are you really spending? That's a lot of money, right? And albums in this day and age, they don't have that same return. Whereas a single might have it because people are so in tune with listening to 2 minute 30 seconds or even less.
Yeah.
They're so in tune to listening to that and absorbing that much, and then moving on to the next thing, because again, music has changed so much where it's like it's really hard to build a loyal fan base. It is possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. It is very possible, but you got to put a little bit more work in. Right now everyone's like so focused on that, I guess you put out enough to
Hmm.
where people will be like, okay, I know this guy. Now I'm ready to check out his EP, which is just like a maybe 4 or 5 song package. And then from there, you build onto, once you build a fan base. And I guess, yeah, I guess that's how you really build in this day and age. And, there may be other ways too, but I guess is the most common go to way for doing that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying, and you really said a lot there. Uh, but the concept of it all is very, it's fundamental, right? It's one of those things where I think going back to, you were saying building an audience, right? I think that that's a concept that oftentimes we don't really think about strategically as artists, because we're so left brain that when it comes to our right brain, the strategy, the business side of things, it doesn't really click until there's a need for it to click. And you mentioned investing $500, maybe even $1,000 on a single. Well, if you're making that type of investment, you better get your business right, because you're not in it for the long haul if you're spending that kind of money but not really seeing a return, or not hoping to see a return due to lack of planning or whatnot. And by the way, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon community, man. They've been sponsoring me for years now. I'm revamping the community. I meant to mention this in the beginning. I'm revamping the community to create kind of like an artist or creative community there, where people like Prodigyl, myself, and others who I've been speaking to on these types of subjects can either be a support system, hopefully bringing them in for more conversations like this, and supporting their artistry as well, but also giving you guys the tools and resources that you need to scale your music up and hopefully build a business around that. So more to come on that, patreon.com/Nico Santana. So yeah, going back to the business side of things, one thing that you mentioned was really important is building that audience. I've learned a lot from tech startups, because I feel like they're kind of raw and just all over the place, like most musicians and artists are. And one thing that I've noticed about tech startups is, they'll have their investment rounds, right? So they'll have like crowdfunding, or, they'll have like series A, B, C, D, et cetera, of investors, investment funding that will provide them the necessary tools or funds really to create and iterate a project that they may have already built up, which is typically referred to as an MVP, a minimum viable product, right? And that's kind of what your singles are. Your singles are your minimum viable product. If you invest $200 into a well-crafted single and then you get good reception from it or good feedback from it, you could see and tweak so that the next single, which is the next iteration of your product, right, can be better, and so on and so forth, until you get to a place where not only have you built a good audience up, you've figured out your sound, you've kind of mastered it. And then from there, like you mentioned, having a warm audience, you have a warm audience where now you could send them to the EP, send them to the album. And more importantly, now you could start doing product offerings like merch, shows, so on and so forth. So talk to me about some of the strategies that you've seen have worked for you as far as actually making a business around your music, and perhaps some of the things that you're still trying to figure out right now.
Yeah. And again, I'm not gonna sit here and be like I'm an expert on these things, right? Like again, like a lot of y'all, like I might be starting out. I'm definitely starting out, but like again, it's the best thing to do is sit back and learn from people,
Right.
right? People who have been doing this for a while, people who have been doing it like you, and I know a few other people like Jay Crumb. I know Ruslan. These guys like provide so many gems for you to use. And they're so accessible. They're so free, right? I mean, I know that Crumb just dropped like an artist elevate course in marketing, and how to find your niche audience and how to really exploit that so you can actually get products sold, or get people excited for albums or even physical sales like vinyls or CDs or whatever it is, right? Not just like you go on to iTunes or Bandcamp and you download the full album. Like, I mean, that's awesome, and that's definitely one step that I'm trying to implement, right? But there's also another step where like people are actually excited to get your physical items, right? And
Yeah.
then merch figures into that, and albums figure into that as well. So for me, just I think one thing is that like you gotta treat this like a business, right?
Mm.
It's or you have two ways to go about it. So if you want to make this your career, then you have to think about it like a business. If you want to
Right.
think of it as a hobby, then you got a very expensive hobby, right? And you got a very expensive hobby, and if that's okay, like if you can afford it, that's great, right? But you can't expect the same results,
Yeah.
right? If you're like spending less time on things, if you're just putting music out just for fun, like you can't expect to blow up or have the algorithm work for you, or like just people naturally discover you and they be like, oh, they're onto you. No, because you're just doing it as a hobby. You're not putting the same amount of work in. Like a person who's serious and really considering this a business, they're putting maybe like twice or thrice the amount of work that you're putting in,
Yeah.
right? Maybe even more. And so really one thing that people say is that I have still yet to do is registering as an LLC, or as a company in itself, like where you can actually legitimize and for tax purposes and stuff like that, just like make you legitimate, right? That can also open up so much more in terms of selling your merch or selling CDs or whatever the case is, right? So definitely, if you want to think on a business mindset, register your business, register your music, register your music business. Registering your music is completely something different, but register yourself, your brand as a business, and get the ball rolling so that you will get into that business mindset. But it also, when it comes down to mindset as well, it's more like, again, like how much time am I willing to put into it, right? How much money am I willing to invest in it? Am I willing to put in the hard work right now so you can reap off it? Because I know people who want to get the benefits right now and not willing to work for it.
Right.
And that's a very dangerous kind of mindset. Especially if you have like an elevated kind of sense of yourself or your music, like it's not going to end up well, right? Because again, we're in a very concentrated, very cluttered field, and there are so many people. And I'm not even talking about CHH. I'm talking about hip hop in general.
Yeah.
Everyone and their moms are trying to be rappers now, right? Like,
yeah, bro. Yeah.
So again, it depends on like where are you trying to branch off into as well? Like, are you just focusing on music? I know you and I have talked about this, and Colt, are you trying to go into mixing and mastering, like, trying to expand on your skills, like building yourself as a brand? Like, you do the music, you do the mixing, you do the mastering and all this stuff. Or you can go about it another way, which is, again, merch, making your own designs, and setting yourself up as that kind of person, right? I know that KB did that with Native Supply. He might not be the best at mixing and mastering. I don't think he does it on his own, but I know that on the graphic design side of things, or like he runs Native Supply, or I think he's an owner of it. He has excelled in that area, so figuring out where you excel and where you can play to your strengths, I think it'd be like very important right now. So for me, it's the music side of things. It's also TikTok for me. Like, I'm trying to build on that platform, trying to make content, make a feature called Wavy Wednesdays. I'm trying to make, now I'm trying to see if I can do some motivational stuff, if I can do some funny stuff, just building my brand to where it's just like, he is a musician, yes, but he's also a very versatile person, right? Like he can really focus and be on his music thing, but also, it's not just like a robotic kind of, oh, I am a musician, check me out. It's more like he's actually a person, and that makes me more relatable to people, right? That makes me like he's not just another not just another entertainer. He is an actual person, and so that's kind of part of my brand. Is like, I don't want to be presented as just as a rapper. I just want to be like, I am a well-rounded person, and I can use these platforms to show that to new people who are like finding me out for the first time through whatever it may be, through Spotify playlists or through TikTok or whatever it is. So, I think there are multiple ways to go about it, but your mindset has to be first, like, how much time and how much money am I willing to invest in this, and which platforms can I use to play to my strengths?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, man. And just kind of giving this my perspective on it. And like you mentioned earlier, we're not coming to you guys, or this video is not necessarily meant to be a platform or what would you call it? A panel of experts, but really just artists who have tried, failed maybe, and learned some things, whether it's through conversations like you mentioned, Jay Crum and a few other people, or trying, right, and testing different things out. And like for me, just to give you an example, for me, where when I came into music, it was very much the people buying your album on iTunes, but the ceiling, or rather the entry point, was a little bit more difficult for you to become an artist, because we didn't have as much access to a lot of the tools that you and I now have access to. For example, and I know I shout out DistroKid on my videos and stuff like that, but the reason why I shout them out is because I was a heavy user. I was a user of DistroKid before they ever came across my page and started sponsoring me, because I could pay, what was it, like $20 a year, upload as many times as I wanted, which means that I could upload singles and do that whole strategy. Whereas before, with the previous distributor, who I won't mention, I had to pay I think it was like $24.99 per single release, if I'm not mistaken. And it was like 50 something bucks for an album release. And as a kid coming out of college, and even when I was in college, I couldn't afford that. Right. And so, to your point, I didn't have a budget in mind. I didn't really have like a strategy as far as like how I would make that money back. I just knew that I loved music. I had a heightened sense of self, because I had kind of struck gold with the situation that I was in, which was I was in a hip hop group that kind of fit a need in the market without us necessarily strategically planning ourselves in that. We were part of a Catholic hip hop group, and at the time there weren't a lot of Catholic artists doing what we did. So we would get bookings, get flown out to shows, get paid for our music. So I thought that would follow through with my own individual artist music without necessarily labeling it as such. And that's when kind of reality hit, right? And that's when I had to like peel back the layers and understand a little bit more of the business side of things, figure that out. As far as the business side of it goes, I think it's difficult to, kind of changing topics a little bit, I think it's difficult to solely rely on streaming revenue for those of us who are, whether it's 10,000, 1,000 listeners a month, or somewhere between 0 and 10,000. I think it's difficult for us to see a really good monthly revenue stream for that. Merch is definitely a good way to doing that. And I think if you keep your overhead a little bit low, meaning that you do production yourself and you don't outsource, you could definitely get more bang for your buck. My group and I, Foundation, which you mentioned earlier, Prodigyl, we've done basically it's print on demand. And because our audience, supports us, we've seen somewhat of a decent return on that, but most of that gets put back into services, which you mentioned earlier, the mixing and the mastering. We've hired graphic designers as well. And even if you do all that stuff yourself, by the way, even if you are your own producer, your own mixing and mastering engineer, even if you can record yourself, and I've learned a few of those things, you still got to pay for things. Like, you still got to pay for the equipment, number one. You still got to pay for the distribution services, even if they're cheap. You still got to pay for, I would encourage people to still pay for marketing services. Like, even if you can promote yourself, I would still say allocate at least 1 to 3% of your budget to paid ads, because you never know who may be watching. And depending on the platform, it might actually work really well for you. And I'm not saying spend all your money on ads, but there's definitely a strategic way of doing that. And there's definitely throwing money in the air and really hoping that something catches. So let's shift over to that, because you and I have had some conversations on that before. And I think you've brought up some good points about how to run ads and what you've heard from other people. And I can give you my perspective. I practically decided maybe a little over two years ago that I was going to change my focus from trying to pursue full-time artistry or being a full-time artist to just kind of being an entrepreneur all in all. And I've been able to offer like digital marketing services to companies. So I've run ads for companies. I've been able to run or to do digital media for companies as well. So I've been able to do their videography and stuff like that. So I've learned a lot from that side. But I think the artist world is a little bit more particular. I think that because you are building a personal brand yourself, like you have to be more focused on perhaps the organic, and then from there do more of the paid ads. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And what are some strategies that you've heard other artists implement or that you've implemented yourself?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I kind of going back to what you were saying with the 1 to 3% on paid ads, right? Definitely set aside some money for some paid ads. I think because the concept or the point of an ad of running ads is really just to get your name out there so that people who haven't heard of you before, right, can actually be like, oh, okay, who is this guy, or like get to listen to your music or whatever content you're trying to put an ad to, right? And so, when you're running ads, you have to be targeting the right group of people, right? Like, that your music might sound similar to like Lecrae or Andy Mineo or NF or whatever it is, or maybe even Kanye. Like, I don't know if you see CHH, but he's gospel. So, but if your music sounds similar to that, right? Like, there's an audience that is also receptive to listening to similar kinds of music. So, first, knowing what your sound is and knowing your, I guess, style is very important, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people might be like, they might have that kind of the Lecrae sound, but they honestly sound like Lil Uzi, right? Or Playboy Cardi or whatever, right? So
Right.
having an awareness of what you sound like is like super important because you know who you're targeting, right? Who the people who will be willing to listen to your music, who will be willing to click that link and check out your music through through a snippet of what they've heard, right?
Yeah.
So running ads is definitely important because you're exposing yourself to new people. And definitely the kind of ads that you run need to be obviously like visually appealing because you need to capture a person's attention. The snippet. Okay, so the main thing that I would really recommend is like running video ads, right? Like with audio from your music, so that people can actually like get to listen to what you sound like, so that they can make an informed decision as to whether or not they should check out the music or keep scrolling. They're like there's two options right there. You either click the link or you keep scrolling, right? And you need something that captures people's attention from that click in the bio or from that click from the ad. Then you have other options, like you can either listen to the music on streaming platforms. You can have you can include an option to where if they really rock with your stuff, like you can have them enter their email in your bio, so you can have an email contact list going, so you can update them on future events or merch drops or new music or whatever it is, right? So you're building up someone who can be potentially loyal to you. Doesn't mean that, because from there's like more branches where they can be like, oh, I don't want to be subscribed to you anymore, or they just delete the email, or they actually check out the stuff, they open the email, or they check out your music, whatever. So there's different options, but the first thing that you do is, all right, is my content for the ad visually appealing and sonically appealing to the point where they want to click the link and go and check out your stuff,
Mm.
right? And so that's definitely there. So I guess those are the two main things that I can really say, is that knowing what you sound like, so you can know what your target audience may potentially be, and even if even if that doesn't happen, right? Because ads, they don't have to be successful all the time. I will again applaud the person who runs the perfect ad and gets like perfect numbers, right? Like that doesn't happen always from the first try. You always have to be retargeting and figuring out, okay, this is where this audience didn't do so well. What can I do better to what target audience do I now have to change to? What parameters do I change? Right. So running ads is not just a one click, one thing. It keeps going and whatever, that'll eventually happen once you figure out what your audience is and what they're looking for.
Right.
But for the first few ads, you might have some hits and might have some misses, and you just have to learn from there. But again, the point of an ad is to really just get eyes and ears to your content.
Right.
So yeah, and also again, I guess like putting aside money to do that is very important, right?
Right.
I just saw a tweet. I don't know if you know the rapper Aclesso.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I
So
think he lives in Miami, so he's not too far away from me. But
yeah,
yeah,
he is Miami. So Akleso just tweeted saying that if your music is not making you over 40K a year, please go and get a job,
wow,
right? Like, yeah,
wow,
that's like very important, right? Because again, we all love to do this. Like everyone loves to do creative stuff, like full time and all that stuff. But again, this is money, and you're
right,
not going to be borrowing loans or whatever to be doing this stuff, right?
right,
Like you need some sort of income, and
right.
that might mean like putting in that grunt work and doing that job, so that you can position yourself to make it a full time thing, God willing, right?
Yeah,
So definitely have the capital ready, but also like run some of that to ads, on top of your production and mixing all that stuff. Run that with ads and promotion. Know your audience, and then make your ads visually appealing and sonically appealing. So if that means talking to someone who is like a graphic designer who can put dope clips together and put your music together and put animations on it,
yeah.
do it, right? But if because that'll just boost the likelihood of people listening to your stuff. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and you touched on a lot of really good concepts and theories that can be applied. Not theories, but just kind of like the overall knowledge that can be applied. So let's like dig into that a little bit deeper without getting too intricate into the details. So I'll give you guys an example. Um, First off, let's lay the groundwork for marketing, and some of you guys may be familiar with this concept, some of you may not. So Prodigyl mentioned warm audiences before, and I want to kind of define that, right? So in marketing, there are what are called a cold audience, a warm audience, and a hot audience. So cold audience is somebody that's never heard of you, never heard of your music, but they're generally interested in the product or service that you're offering. So that means that they like music. Specifically, they might like a particular genre, whatever genre you're in, if it's hip hop, rock, whatever it is that you're uh, uh, considered, right? And some of us are multi-genre, but whatever is the bulk of your artistry, then dive a little bit deeper into that, and that's where Prodigyl was saying, know yourself, know your music. Do you sound like this artist? Do you sound like that artist? So you may fit, Lecrae's, CHH sphere, was a Christian hip hop sphere, but you may sound more like, you said, Lil Uzi. So there might be a combination of those two audiences that you could target, and that drives it a little bit more niche. If you get too niche, then unfortunately that may not necessarily work out for you in the marketing world, because there's too little people to actually make an impact for you financially. But if you get too broad, then you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it lands. So define that audience. Cold audience, again, they don't know who you are, but they're generally interested in your product. Warm audiences, they've heard of you before. They may not necessarily be ready to buy your product or service, but they're kind of in the market. So that means they're ready to listen to some music. They might want to work out to a new song, and they're kind of like browsing, whether it's Instagram or TikTok, wherever, and they're already in the mindset, whether they know it or not, that they want to consume new music. And then, of course, a hot audience is they're ready to pounce. They just need that in front of them right then and there. So how do you get that cold audience, warm audience, and hot audience with paid ads? It really depends. And this is kind of the strategy that I was talking to Prodigyl about the other day, that I've seen has worked. And that's really focusing on building your brand recognition. So your name that is recognizable to people far and wide, as far as can be, right? Because music, you mentioned, is not a very profitable thing. As far as, if somebody listens to your song one time on Spotify, you get 0.003, I think, cents per one stream, right? So if you get one person to listen one time, that's definitely not going to pay your light bill. So you need as many people as possible to listen as many times as possible. So that's why you cast as wide a net as possible. So when you build that brand recognition, hopefully you have enough people on board that would potentially listen to your music. Then you have brand strength, which means that you're consistent. Typically you're putting out music or singles, as we mentioned earlier, on a consistent basis, or at least that you're catering to your audience depending on what they need. I've seen that with our group Foundation. We have a little bit of an older audience, so that they're used to the album mode of releasing music and consuming music. They're actually willing to listen to a full album as opposed to just singles. So that release strategy actually works a little bit better for us,
Right.
knowing our audience. But that's something that we've come to learn and find out over a 10-year period, right? That
Yeah,
doesn't.
that's trial and error, right?
There you
Like,
go, man. Trial and error.
yeah, and that's the whole point is that, like, again, when I came into it, I was like, it took me a minute to realize that, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done the album route. Maybe I
Yeah.
should have just dropped singles
Yeah, you
of
have no data to go off of.
because of the sound and audience that I'm trying to target, which is
Right.
a younger audience with a trap sound
Right.
that are so used to listening to workout playlists
Right.
or other, just getting it like on their release radar, I guess, and then listening to it and then keep going, right? But
Yeah.
you got to keep getting them warm to you and then hopefully hot so that they'll be ready to pounce, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if you're so what I would, as far as a strategy for any new artist, I would focus on building that brand. And if you do paid ads, I personally wouldn't recommend, and some people would advise against this, but I personally wouldn't recommend going in for the sale right away. I would personally recommend creating kind of like a general a pool of people that will buy into your brand first. So that's technically you're buying their attention, right? And I mean, there's dozens of marketers and people on the internet that are saying, even if a service is free, it's not, because ultimately people are buying your attention, and then you're selling your attention to them, right? So buying their attention, catching them, essentially in an oversaturated market, and allowing them to pay attention to what you have to offer that's different from everybody else. And that's what you have to define too. I think that Prodigyl has a unique opportunity because of who he is, his background, his ethnicity, and then also his talent. So all of that combined makes him uniquely him, that really no one can replicate that, right? And I think that that's what Lecrae and some of the other artists that were early in the CHH game were able to benefit from. Is there weren't a lot of CHH artists. There weren't a lot of people, maybe, I hate to put it this way, but maybe there was like, a Toby Mac who, was kind of like a white dude from, suburban America and putting out music for, Christian soccer moms, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But when like Lecrae came in, he came in from like basically representing what I would say authentic hip hop was at the time, and still is, right? Somebody who was ethnic, somebody who was black, and to say it explicitly, and somebody who came from those hoods, but then speaking a message that was almost paradoxical to hear from somebody who came from that type of environment. So I think that that's where we have to, as artists, and I've struggled with this. I'll be honest with you guys. I've struggled with finding that unique product offering, or rather my unique brand, in a market that's oversaturated. There's a dozen plus, people trying to make Latin music, in Tampa alone, right? And if you expand that to the World Wide Web, now you're competing with the whole world. Like, it's crazy. So as much as you can define that for yourself, like do that, build up your brand, like I said earlier. And then when you start running those ads, focus on building that brand. Now that you know that you have people's attention, the retargeting that you mentioned, Prodigyl, I think that that's where it would be helpful, knowing that people have visited your pages, and we can get all technical on how to retarget people and stuff like that, Facebook pixels and whatnot. But I won't get into that in this video. Once you've built up your brand, you can then go
Yeah.
that higher level. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to sit here and say that like I'm the best at retargeting or really like looking into it, and that's something that I definitely need to improve on. Is that like figuring out like what exactly I need to tweak so I can get better
Right.
results. And also when you were talking about like standing out on your own, standing out from the crowd, right? Like,
Yeah.
my background, my background is Indian, well, Malayali, like I'm from South India,
Right.
from Kerala. I'm Catholic, and
Yep.
in Catholicism from a smaller right called Syro Malabar. So like I am like, I used to think like when I got into this thing, I'm like, yo, I feel so like alienated from everything because like it's like everything's just kind of like working against me. I'm Indian. I'm like, I'm Catholic. and even in the Catholic circle, I'm from a smaller right, so like no one, people might have heard about it, but not really like, just know anything about it. So like, will I be completely accepted and all these things? But
Sure.
I'm realizing over time, it's just like, oh, those are my biggest strengths,
Yep.
right? Like those are the
Yep.
things that keep make me unique. And so I'm also like kind of figuring out ways to like include my culture and
Yeah.
just kind of celebrate the culture a bit more in future releases and content and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely going to be tapping into that to kind of like lift up my brand a little bit.
I think that's super helpful. I heard this once, and I don't know if Ruslan said it or somebody else said it, but think of yourself 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, right? Who you are. So you defined yourself. You said, you're Indian, but you're not just the people. I mean, India is such a big, like, demographic. Like, you could break it down: South Indian, North Indian. Like, it's so multicultural there to begin with, and unfortunately we were very ignorant on in the Western Hemisphere, but giving you guys a little bit of I don't know, in Indian education, I guess. My wife is from Kerala as well, so I've learned through her about the Sierra Malabar Church and about South India and more importantly, like Kerala Indians, Malayalis. And just learning about the culture, man, and like you said, playing up on your strength and defining those little things that may be meaningless to like the larger world, but actually mean a whole lot to you. And I think, I think along the way, when we strive to be like these big name artists like Kanye West, like they've already amassed millions and millions of fans that they don't necessarily need to define that particularly because they've already been known for that, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you can picture yourself 5 to 10 years uh, younger and figure out your qualities that make you who you are, whether it's your faith, whether it's that you came from a large family, ethnic background, like write all those things down and then try to define it in a way where there's a nice overlap where where there could be a large enough audience to come to a show in Houston where Prodigyl is based out of, or in Tampa where I'm based out of, and now that, hey, that's your primary target audience, and then hopefully you can expand from there because that's the thing. It's like you have your main core fans that will hopefully let other people know through word of mouth advertising, which we know is like the best form of advertising and it's technically free. Through word of mouth advertising, who you are, your music, whether they're listening to it on a friend's playlist or whatever it is, and then it expands from there, right? That's really what Lecrae did. That I mean, Lecrae used to play at small churches. I remember seeing him at a small church here in Orlando, and it wasn't that small, to be honest. I mean, it was considered a mega church, but relative to some of the larger venues he's played in more recent years, like he started in that was the core audience, right? It was just youth group kids, and then it grew from there, and eventually he was able to land these big time festivals and concerts and whatnot. And I think people forget that. I think it's easy to kind of compare yourself to these big name artists without realizing that they had a core fan base that was made up of a very small percentage of people who were very much like them growing up, maybe 5-10 years before that.
And I think for me too, it's like I didn't really come from like that hip hop background. So like I came from like more of a rock and metal background.
Mm-hmm.
Me even like for me, like playing small shows is fun,
Yeah.
because a lot of metal bands do that, like these
Right.
infinite shows and like these crazy mosh pits that are going on, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, I want to do that, because the energy is still like so much more palpable, right? So
Right.
for me, like the concept of starting small was never like a big detractor, or like a disappointing thing where I'm like, oh, I have to put. And I'm like, no, we got to respect the grind. You got to put in the grind, like the grunt work, right? So if you want to see fruits of your labor, you got to do the shows that you might not want to do, or like, just, but it's all about getting your name out there, people recognizing who you are and your brand.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you said that. Doing the shows that you don't want to do, and there's a lot of grunt work that needs to be done in the beginning, things that you don't want to do, like we've talked about this budgeting, like figuring out where your revenue is going to come from to fund your enterprise, right? Like figuring out what an LLC is and being able to incorporate keeping your numbers, tracking all that stuff for accounting purposes and tax purposes, to, outsourcing or learning the trade yourself, whether it's graphic design, mixing and mastering and all that good stuff. I mean, it's definitely, it can definitely be overwhelming, but here's the thing, like if you have a very profound why in your heart, right? Not just to get money, not just to get famous. I mean, those things should be byproducts of pretty much any field where you become successful at what you do. If you're successful enough, both of those things will happen in no matter what industry you're in. So that should not be a goal to pursue. That's just going to be a byproduct. The goal, I think, is the things that you can control, which are your work ethic, which are the knowledge that comes from learning your industry and learning all sorts of different facets, because you are a CEO. You're sitting in the founder's chair of your own enterprise, unless you're part of a band, which then again, you're part of a pool of co-founders essentially, right? And your product or your service is your music and your performances, right? That's the product that you're pitching, is your music, your merch maybe, and your performances are your service. You're providing a service to people, whether it's, a form of fellowship or coming together of sorts, providing people good memories, a good time. So once you start looking at it from that perspective, I think the whole world kind of shifts away from how do I make myself big and grand to, hey, like what problem am I solving here, or how am I adding value to this particular genre or to this particular community that I'm in. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think again, time is like very important, right? Like the amount of time that you take to realize those things,
Right.
the amount of time you take to learn what an LLC is, or like the amount of time you take to learn other crafts. Like for me, like time is money, and I think it's a sentiment shared by a lot of people, right? Like you said, like the byproduct, the goal shouldn't be to be famous or to make money, because again, those are byproducts of if you are call for that, if that's in your future.
Right.
um, but you know like the amount of time that you invest to know what your value is to a certain space, I
Mm.
think that's like very very important. And I think a lot of people overlook that. A lot of people just want, because again, we're in like a fast food culture,
Yeah.
right now. And I think there's special graces that are also released when we are able to sit in patience and to like really ride out the storm. And
Right.
so yeah, I mean that's kind of what I have to say about that.
Uh,
It's a long process, and I'm just 2 years in, and I'm already saying it's a long process, right? But and you've been doing it for 10 years, you know what a long process is like, you know what I'm saying? But
yeah.
like for me, like I'm feeling it, and
Mhm.
it's not full time for me yet, right? Like I have a job, I have, I'm putting in money, and like I some people might want to say that it's an expensive hobby, but I'm honestly, that's not where I want to be at. I hopefully, God willing, that I do want to make it full time. If I have those platforms ready to go, if I am running my ads properly, if I do have a hot audience that's hot enough to like jump on my stuff, then that's the goal right there. It's just to have a fan base that connects with you, have create content and create music that's compelling for even new audiences, right? But also something that relates to the people who are rocking with you right now, and just be able to just live out your life through the way that you really want to live. Sometimes, for me, like I'm not really like kind of like the 9 to 5 kind of guy, but like I do it because I need to, because there is a goal for me, and so that's really what keeps me going, is that sometimes I just want to be like, "Oh, I'm done with this, but I'm like, and I have a bigger goal, and I have to put in the hard work right now so that I can kind of live out my dreams in the future.
Yeah, man. And I've mentioned earlier in this conversation, I've pivoted away from making music my ultimate dream as a full-time career, and realized that like you mentioned, you're not a 9 to 5 guy. Like, I've realized that I'm really an entrepreneur at heart. Like, that's what motivated me in the beginning, and I had to figure that out through the process and the journey to really come out and say, like, I'm just an entrepreneur. Music happened to be the product or service that I was offering, but that I can pivot at any time. So when you learn these skills, anything from, like you said, legal, finance, so on and so forth, you can easily transfer that to really any business endeavor moving forward. And that makes you like 10 times more valuable than the person who just sits and watches and waits for something to happen to
Right.
them.
Right.
Either that, or they get it taken advantage of in whatever situation that they're in, meaning that they get signed to a label. Cool. They sit there with a pool of artists. They don't make a dime. And then eventually they have to pay back the money because they got an advance on a contract they didn't read. They didn't know the language. They didn't understand how the inner workings of a contract, or how music.
They didn't get a lawyer.
They didn't get a lawyer, things like that. And oftentimes they're in desperate situations because they didn't have a job, right? They didn't have a plan B. And that's, man, I'm very grateful for this journey. And while I still love making music, like, I've realized that my passion for creativity, entrepreneurship, business was really what the foundation of that music journey was for me. And why I enjoy having these conversations with up and coming artists, because not to say that I don't still have that chance to make it happen for me. I'm just not focused on that. I'm focused on something a little bit different. But I can relate to a lot of what Prodigyl is saying in the beginning of his journey. And for the record, I mean, I think I would say that most business owners would say that it takes at least 5 to 10 years to really see the fruits of your labor when starting any business, especially when starting a business from scratch. Like, if you're buying a business, it's a little bit different. But if you're starting a business from scratch, which you should consider your music a business unless you're trying to make it a hobby, which, we've been talking about it more from a business perspective. It's going to take 5 to 10 years at least. So that patient grind, like you mentioned, Prodigyl, is huge. And that's a virtue, right? Patience is a virtue. And
Yeah.
that's very true in business as well. Um, we've covered a lot, and I definitely don't want to oversaturate, this conversation with tons of topics, because I'm sure we could go, 10 hours talking about stuff like this. But I definitely want the audience to be wanting for more, and then of course do their own research. You mentioned a lot of free resources that are out there online, from J. Crumb to Ruslan, people that we've learned from in the past. I used to follow this guy named Manifest. I don't know if he still does stuff like that. Adam Ivy, Burstamo is another great page. If you haven't heard of those guys, they're music marketing. They have an actual music marketing agency, and they share their I guess their wisdom with artists. But between Prodigyl and myself, we're kind of like, I would say, small time artists or entrepreneurs, sharing these nuggets of wisdom, if you will, with you guys, just to kind of impart that, and also to learn ourselves. So if you have any comments as far as what we've discussed, we definitely love to hear from you guys. I should have been saying this throughout the video, but definitely comment in the comment section below as far as what things you thought of throughout this conversation, from building your business, building your brand, running ads, marketing, so on and so forth, budgeting even. What are things that have worked for you, and what are things that haven't worked? And for the last minute or so, I want to give Prodigyl the stage here, the platform, to share all his socials and where you can find his music. So take it away, man.
Yeah, man. So right now, actually, well, a couple of weeks away from dropping an EP called "Son of the Light." That's about 5 songs, and it's been great. I've had a 3 month rollout. I've released 3 singles, and just really pushing that, and really getting some traction on those singles as well has been great, especially for Glow. Glow is one of my singles. So Glow, GMS, and War Dogs I released with Rockstar JT. But yeah, that's going to be part of the EP, Sound of the Light. It's coming out September 24th, and it's going to be a dope release. And after that, we'll see what the future holds. I'm planning other projects and stuff, but um, just really just planning out strategically as to like what I need to do next. Um, but my socials are Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at It's Prodigyl, Prodigyl. It's a little different, so it's like Prodigy but with an L. But don't call me Prodigy because a lot of people call me that. But yeah, so we have those socials, and then on TikTok you can find me on at Prodigyl Music. I've been, posting. I think that's one thing that I do need to be better at is posting consistently on TikTok. That's the main thing. Like and that's why I'm coming up with content ideas. I just need to implement them. So, but that's definitely a platform that I really want to grow on. So definitely follow me on there, Prodigyl Music.
And the biggest ways that you could support Prodigyl are definitely following him on social media. So he mentioned all his platforms. Please do me a solid. If you learned anything from this podcast, if you found any of this content valuable, go to his pages right now, hit that follow button, and then whenever he posts content, make sure to like it and comment on it, because the algorithm is our friend and our enemy, and the way that we can make it our friend is through you guys, and that's by supporting with a like. Liking it is free, commenting is free, you don't have to buy anything, okay? Following is free, maybe just spending a couple minutes a day consuming the content and learning more about Prodigyl. Bright young guy who's coming out the gate, like I said, with professionalism, with humility and quality music, man. I can see him going far in this journey, but again, without your support, it's a moot point to try to do all this stuff without really having an audience to do it for. For myself, I run a small digital media and marketing agency. It's NTS Media, so you could follow me on there, ntsmedia.co on Instagram, or you can follow my artist page. I post a lot of creative content for brands and myself, music as well, and my family. I like to share personal stuff on there from time to time, and that's at nicosantana.co. If you're interested in becoming a part of an artist community that really wants to invest in artists like myself and like Prodigyl and even you, go to patreon.com/Nico Santana. I'm strategizing and kind of planning that out to make sure that it's a community for artists, built by artists, and that way I can give back to artists like Prodigyl, whether it's through sponsoring videos or music or giving them the appropriate one-on-one support whenever they have questions on things like DistroKid or music marketing or whatever it is. So feel free to go on there and check out all the different tiers. Artist and creator tier is specifically for artists, but if you just want to be a supporter on there, feel free to do that. Much love, guys. Please hit that subscribe button, press that like button for me. Again, if you found any of this content valuable, share it with a friend that makes music. And until next time, much love. Peace.